There's a small mountain town in Colorado that has been there for almost 30 years. The population never changes. The same 4 boys walk to the same bus stop every morning. One of them dies every few episodes, and the next week he is just there again, standing in the snow in his orange parka like nothing happened. The adults riot over the same petty grievances. The celebrities show up, get humiliated, and disappear. The world keeps turning outside that little town. Elections come and go, pandemics sweep through, technology reshapes civilization. But inside South Park, Colorado, nothing changes. The boys are still 9 years old, the snow is still falling, and everyone just keeps going about their day. South Park premiered on Comedy Central on August 13, 1997. Trey Parker and Matt Stone were in their mid-20s. They had built the show from a pair of animated shorts, both called The Spirit of Christmas, one from 1992 and one from 1995, made from construction paper cutouts and stop-motion animation in Parker's apartment at the University of Colorado. The second short went viral, back when going viral meant being passed around on VHS tapes and early internet forums. Comedy Central called, the show launched. And somewhere in the process of building a comedy about foul-mouthed 9-year-olds in a mountain town, Trey Parker and Matt Stone accidentally built one of the most intricate, self-referential, quietly haunted animated universes ever put on television. That's not a compliment you hear about South Park very often. People know it as the one with the talking poop. The one that mocked Scientology, the one that got banned in China, the one where Cartman fed a boy his own parents in a chili. And all of that is true. But underneath the profanity and the shock humor and the celebrity takedowns, there is a genuine mythology running through this show. A continuity that stretches across 28 seasons and keeps folding back on itself. A set of rules about how this world works that the show almost never states directly but has been building since the beginning. And that is what we are here for tonight. We are going to sit with 9 fan theories about South Park. Not the wild ones pulled from nowhere. The ones that are built from specific episodes, from specific lines of dialogue, from patterns that show up again and again across the run of the series. Some of what you hear tonight is confirmed canon that a lot of people missed because the show buried it in a season 14 superhero parody and moved on. Some of it is fan theory that fills in the gaps between what the show shows you and what it might be trying to say. All of it is grounded in episodes that actually aired. This is a long one. Get comfortable. Let the ideas come slowly. There is no need to rush any of this. Let's start at the very beginning with the character the show has been trying to explain since its first season. The boy in the orange parka, the one who keeps dying, the one nobody remembers losing. Let's start with Kenny McCormick and the theory that what he carries is not a superpower at all. It is a curse that his parents brought home from a meeting they only attended because the beer was free. Kenny McCormick has died more times than any character in the history of American television. During the first 5 seasons of South Park, he died in nearly every single episode. He was crushed, burned, shot, impaled, eaten by animals, launched into space, struck by lightning, and consumed by various supernatural entities. Each time by the following episode, he was simply back, standing at the bus stop. Parka hood pulled so tight you could barely see his eyes. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody asked where he had been. The show treated his death as a running gag, a setup with no punchline, a joke the audience was in on and the characters were not. And then in season 5, the show did something nobody expected. In an episode called Kenny Dies, which aired on December 5th, 2001, Kenny was diagnosed with a terminal illness. He deteriorated over the course of the episode. He died in the hospital. The other boys grieved him properly, with weight and real feeling, and the show killed off the running gag by making it mean something. Stan could not even bring himself to visit Kenny in the hospital. He just sat outside. Because once the death was real and slow and medical instead of cartoonishly instant, Stan did not know how to handle it. Kenny stayed dead for the rest of season 5. Butters and Tweak were brought in as replacements. The show moved on. And then at the end of season 6, Kenny just came back. No explanation, no ceremony, no... He was standing at the bus stop in his parka, and the show acted like none of it had happened. For years, this was treated as exactly what it looked like: a production decision, a writer's room choice, a cartoon being a cartoon. Consequences reset between episodes because that is how animated comedies work. And that was probably the right reading for a long time. But then season 14 happened, and the show stopped pretending it did not have an answer. The story arc that explained everything came in 3 episodes: Coon 2, Mysterion Rises, and Coon vs. Coon and Friends, which aired in October and November of 2010. In those episodes, the boys dress up as superheroes, each claiming to have real powers. Kenny, operating under the name Mysterion, claims his power is that he cannot die. Nobody believes him. He stabs himself in the chest to prove it. He wakes up in his bed the next morning. He shoots himself in the head in front of the other boys to make them remember. Everyone is devastated, and then the next day, nobody remembers it happened. Kenny wakes up, goes to school, and the conversation has been erased from everyone else's memory. In those episodes, Kenny goes looking for answers. He traces his parents' history. He asks them directly about a cult they used to attend. His mother and father, sitting in their poverty-stricken house, smoking crack and watching television, confirm they were members of the cult of Cthulhu when Kenny was young. His father clarifies with no apparent shame that they were only in it for the free beer. That is the McCormick family in a single sentence. They stumbled into a ritual dedicated to an immortal elder god from the H.P. Lovecraft mythology, attended just enough meetings to get drawn into something that would affect their son for the rest of his life, and left when the beer ran out. The cult's language is important here. In the show, the goth kids show Mysterion a passage from a text that reads, "That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons even death may die." This line originates from Lovecraft's work, appearing in The Nameless City, written in 1921, and also in The Call of Cthulhu, published in 1928. It is spoken in the context of something that cannot be killed by conventional means, something that exists outside the normal rules of mortality. And in the show's canon, this is the origin of what Kenny carries. His parents' participation in the cult attached something to the McCormick bloodline, not a gift, not a power he chose, something that activates every time he dies, bringing him back to life through a mechanism involving his mother. The show shows this directly. After Kenny shoots himself in the head, the scene cuts to his mother in bed, suddenly jolting upright, crying out in pain and saying, "It's happening again." She looks at her husband with genuine regret and says, "We never should have gone to that stupid cult meeting." Then the scene shows her placing a newborn Kenny in his crib, back in his orange parka, where he grows instantly back to his current age. This is not implication. This is the show, in the clearest possible terms, telling you the mechanism. Kenny's mother acts as a supernatural vessel. The cult's association with Cthulhu, a being that exists outside normal death and time, means Kenny simply cannot stay dead. He comes back through his mother every single time. The goth kids confirm the only loophole in Mysterion Rises. They tell Kenny that an immortal can only be killed by another immortal. This is the one rule that governs his existence. It is lifted from the Necronomicon within the show's world. He is not unkillable by any means available to his friends, his enemies, or the random accidents of daily life in South Park. He is trapped. And here's where the theory moves past the canon and into the question that the show raises but never fully answers. What does it feel like to be Kenny McCormick? Not the running gag version, not the superhero version, but the actual experience of living in this body in this town. He dies. He experiences whatever death is in this universe. He comes back through his mother, waking up in his bed, and the people he spent his last moments with have no memory that anything happened. He cannot make them hold the knowledge. He tried in front of the other heroes, and it lasted one day. He shot himself in the head to prove his reality to them, and they woke up the next morning as if it had been a dream. He is the only person in South Park who carries every death he has ever had. The others get to forget. He is not allowed to. There is a moment in Coon vs. Coon and Friends that captures this better than any analysis could. After one of his resurrections, Kenny announces to the group quietly that he is tired. He says he wants to go to bed. And then he shoots himself in the head again. He is not trying to make a point that time. He is not demonstrating anything for anyone's benefit. He is just tired. And going to sleep is the only way he knows to be alone with the weight of what he carries. This is not a superpower. A superpower is something you can choose to use. A superpower is something that gives you an advantage, something that puts you above the world you inhabit. What Kenny has is a sentence. He is required to return, required to watch everyone forget, required to carry the accumulated memory of every death while the world resets around him, clean and indifferent. The boy in the orange parka has been dying on this mountain for almost 30 years, and every time he comes back, nobody asks where he went. That is not a gift. That is a very specific kind of loneliness that the show never stops being about, even when it looks like it is just being a cartoon. There is another dimension to Kenny's story that the show builds in the periphery, never quite centering it, but never letting it disappear either. It is the dimension of class. Kenny McCormick comes from the poorest family in South Park. This is not incidental. The McCormick house is a shack. His parents drink, they smoke crack, they cycle through various states of dysfunction. His clothes are secondhand, and his lunch, when he has one, reflects a household where money runs out before the week does. In a town of middle-class families, Kenny is the economic outlier. He is the kid the others have to explain away when adults ask why their child is spending time with him. The show uses this contrast consistently. Stan lives in a comfortable house with a geologist father and a mother who argues with her husband about normal things. Kyle's parents are neurotic and occasionally overbearing, but they are present, educated, and financially secure. Cartman has everything he wants because Leanne has never been able to deny him anything. And then there is Kenny, who has nothing by comparison and who shows up at the bus stop every morning anyway. Some fan readings of the show have proposed that Kenny's poverty is the deeper meaning of his death cycle, that he represents the way the working class is expendable in American culture, disposable in the way that people without money or power are always disposable, noticed when convenient and forgotten when not. The deaths are real, but the mourning is brief. Something else always comes along to redirect the group's attention. He is replaced in season 6 by Butters, who is replaced by Tweak, who eventually cedes back to Kenny himself. He cycles back through the narrative the way poor people cycle through systems that were not built with them in mind. Used when necessary, set aside when not, never quite elevated to the status of someone the story cannot continue without. This reading is not in conflict with the supernatural one. Both can be true. The Cthulhu cult gave Kenny his immortality. His class position gave him the invisibility that makes the immortality feel like its cruelest version of itself. He cannot stay dead, and he cannot stay remembered. He keeps returning to a group that loves him in its way, but loves him the way people sometimes love those they do not fully see. Easily, habitually, without the particular effort that recognition requires. When Kenny is dying and Kenny dies, truly dying, slow and medical, and without the instant absurdity of his cartoon deaths, the weight of it affects the boys in ways that the quick deaths never did. Stan cannot visit. Cartman does something terrible. Kyle holds it together with effort that reads as real. The show is saying something in that episode about what it looks like when Kenny's death is allowed to matter, when it is not cleaned up by the next episode, when the forgetting is not available and the grief has to be sat with. And then the episode ends and Kenny comes back and the forgetting is available again and everything resets. The show knows what it is doing with this. It has always known. There is something the show communicates about Kenny's memory that never gets stated plainly but accumulates through observation if you watch enough episodes in sequence. The deaths change him, not in ways that are visible, not in ways that produce scenes where Kenny sits with someone and processes what he has been through. But in the texture of who he is from season to season, there is something quieter about him than there might have been at the start. Something that has learned to hold experience without letting it show. In the early seasons, Kenny's deaths are played entirely for shock and quick comedy. He falls into a wood chipper, he gets hit by a car, he is eaten by a rabid bull. The deaths are inventive and immediate, and the response is always the same. Oh my God, they killed Kenny, you bastards. And then the episode moves on. Kenny is back next week. The show never stays with the death long enough for it to mean anything. But as the seasons accumulate and the mythology around him becomes more developed, the deaths feel different. Not more graphic, not more elaborate, but more weighted. There is a quality to how Kenny moves through scenes in the later seasons that is hard to name, but unmistakable once you notice it. He participates, he is present, he is not simply a prop waiting to be killed, but there is something underneath his participation that is already accounting for the next death, already calculating the distance between now and the reset. This quality, which might be called the quietness of someone who has accepted a thing they cannot change, is the most realistic element of his character. People who live with chronic pain or chronic fear or chronic loss develop a relationship with their condition that is not dramatic. They do not narrate it, they just carry it. They make their jokes and spend time with their friends and show up to the ordinary things of life. And underneath all of it, the condition is always there, not dominating every moment, but present in all of them. Kenny's accumulated deaths live in him this way. And the cruelest part of the mechanism is that he cannot share it. He has tried. He shot himself in the head in front of witnesses who forgot it by morning. He cannot make the knowledge transferable. He cannot unburden himself by telling someone. He is the exclusive repository of a history that the world has decided not to acknowledge. Every death he has ever had exists only inside him, inaccessible to everyone else, permanently his alone. There is one more detail that the theory returns to, and it concerns Kenny's voice. Throughout the show, Kenny speaks through a muffled parka hood. His words are unintelligible without subtitles or very close listening. The other boys respond to him in ways that suggest they understand what he is saying, but to the audience, he is largely incomprehensible. The show has always played this as a comic device, but it is also a metaphor that is almost too precise to be accidental. Kenny is saying things. He is always saying things. He is the most present, most communicative member of the group in some episodes, gesticulating and commenting and participating at full volume. And the world cannot understand him. What he says does not get through clearly. His words arrive muffled and interpreted by the people around him and then acted on, in ways that may or may not reflect what he actually said. He is perpetually misheard in a world where he has more to say than anyone. The parka is his curse made visible. The hood pulled tight is the membrane between what Kenny knows and what the world is willing to receive. He is always talking, nobody quite hears him. If you're finding this interesting, go ahead and subscribe. There's a lot more to sit with tonight. Now let's talk about Eric Cartman. Specifically, let's talk about the one thing Cartman has never admitted to himself, and the show has been quietly confirming for over 20 years. Cartman does not hate Kyle Broflovsky. Cartman is obsessed with Kyle Broflovsky. And the theory that has been sitting in the South Park fan community for a long time holds that obsession is not cruelty, not rivalry, and not simply bigotry. It is something Cartman does not have the emotional vocabulary to name, and the show has been leaving evidence of it in nearly every season since they were both 8 years old. Let's build the case slowly because it deserves that kind of patience. Eric Cartman is described by Trey Parker and Matt Stone in their own words as a little Archie Bunker. Parker has said that Cartman is both of their dark sides, the things they would never say, the impulses that exist somewhere in everyone and get suppressed by the civilizing force of conscience and consequence. Kyle Broflovsky is modeled directly on Matt Stone himself, right down to the red hair worn in a Jew fro and the Ushanka hat. Stone grew up in a household with some Jewish heritage. Kyle is the only Jewish kid in South Park. The dynamic between them is, by the creator's own description, directly comparable to the relationship between Archie Bunker and Michael Stevick on All in the Family, a combative codependency in which neither character can fully function without the other to push against. That parallel matters more than it might seem at first. Archie and Michael did not simply dislike each other, they needed each other. Their arguments were the engine of that show. Take either one away and the other has no defining purpose. Parker and Stone built the same structure into Cartman and Kyle. In over 28 seasons, that structure has revealed something about Cartman that the character himself would rather die than acknowledge. Start with tonsil trouble, the season 12 episode in which Cartman deliberately infects Kyle with HIV. This is treated as one of his worst acts, and it is, objectively, a horrifying thing to do to someone. But watch what happens across the episode. The two end up working together to find a cure because both their lives are affected. They travel together, they are a unit operating toward a shared goal. And at one point, a man at an airport assumes they are a couple. Kyle is furious. Cartman says nothing. That silence is small, but it sits there. In Le Petit Tourette, season 11, Cartman has been pretending to have Tourette's syndrome so he can say racist things in public without consequence. Kyle discovers the scheme and sets in motion a plan to expose him on national television by getting Cartman booked on a Dateline program. The plan is going to work. Cartman is about to humiliate himself in front of the country. And then, at the last second, Kyle accidentally disrupts the broadcast, saving Cartman from the exposure. He did not mean to save him, it was a mistake. But when Cartman realizes what happened, he does something that stops the scene cold. He hugs Kyle, not sarcastically, not as a setup for a twist. He just hugs him and he says, "I love you, man." The scene moves on quickly, the show does not dwell on it, but it happened. In Kenny Dies, the season 5 episode where Kenny is dying of a terminal illness, the boys are all grieving in different ways. Stan cannot bring himself to visit. Kenny's actual death scene is played with genuine weight. And in that episode, when Cartman is shown crying over Kenny, genuinely crying, the person who holds him is Kyle. Kyle puts his arms around Cartman and lets him cry. For a moment, the hatred dissolves, and there is just a kid who is sad, being held by another kid. The show walks past it quickly because that is what the show does, but the image was there. Cartman Finds Love is season 16, episode 7. A new student named Nicole transfers to South Park Elementary. She is black. Cartman assumes she should be paired with Tolkien Black, the only other black student in school, and takes it upon himself to be their matchmaker. His matchmaking scheme is elaborate and somewhat insane, involving locking them in the boys' locker room overnight with a deli platter and massage oil. But here is the part that is harder to explain. When Nicole tells some of the other girls she has a crush on Kyle, Cartman intercepts this information and reacts in a way that goes well beyond his supposed goal of pairing her with Tolkien. He tells Nicole that he and Kyle are already a couple, that Kyle is just not out yet. This lie then spreads through the school. Cartman could have accomplished his stated objective without involving himself and Kyle at all. He could have found a dozen other ways to redirect Nicole's interest. Instead, he created a fake romantic relationship between himself and Kyle, and then committed to it so thoroughly that when Kyle took Nicole to a Denver Nuggets game, Cartman showed up at the arena, got on the Jumbotron in front of thousands of people, and serenaded Kyle with the song I Swear by All For One, with Brad Paisley on guitar, a heart with their faces projected behind him. He told the entire arena that he and Kyle were in love, and that they should not let society dictate who they could be with. Stan, watching from the stands, simply asked why Cartman was so into this. Cartman said he did not know. He did not know. That is the most honest thing Cartman says in the entire episode. The show's internal wiki documents a moment from It's a Jersey Thing, season 14, where Kyle fights to protect Cartman from someone attacking him. After it is over, Cartman looks at Kyle and says, "Deep down inside, you're a monster, but you're my little monster." He pinches Kyle's cheek. He says it the way you might say it to someone you love. There is the line from Tonsil Trouble where it is mentioned that Cartman sneaks into Kyle's room at night. A lot. The show uses it as a joke. But Cartman sneaks into Kyle's bedroom at night, regularly, for reasons the show does not clarify. And neither he nor Kyle seems to find this as alarming as it probably should be. There are the multiple occasions across the series where they are mistaken for a couple and Kyle objects furiously while Cartman simply does not respond at all. There is the subplot in the Imagination Land trilogy, season 11, where Cartman is so fixated on making Kyle fulfill a lost bet in a sexually intimate way that he pursues it across 3 episodes, refuses every offer of compensation or substitution, and dedicates enormous resources and personal effort to this single goal. The specifics of what he wants Kyle to do are played as absurd comedy. But the fixation itself is not funny. The fixation is specific and personal, and it never fully makes sense as simple cruelty or even as a domination play. It is something else. A prominent fan analysis describes the Cartman-Kyle dynamic as similar to the Joker and Batman in The Dark Knight. Cartman has built his entire identity in opposition to Kyle. Without Kyle as the thing to push against, to obsess over, to destroy, and then somehow need back, Cartman loses the organizing principle of his psychology. He does not simply want Kyle to suffer. He wants Kyle to be there, suffering, present, engaged, reacting, unable to ignore him. Because a Kyle who has walked away and stopped caring is the one thing Cartman cannot tolerate. Parker and Stone have acknowledged they nearly killed Kyle off. They grew tired of the character, found him too similar to Stan, and had a version of the show where Butters replaced him. They eventually chose to keep Kyle because of the comedy generated by his relationship with Cartman. They kept Kyle because of what he and Cartman are together, that is the creators themselves saying the show does not fully work without this dynamic. Trey Parker voices Cartman, Matt Stone voices Kyle. Parker has said Cartman is his dark side. Kyle is modeled on Stone. The show is, at some level that neither of them probably intended, about the part of Trey Parker that cannot stop tormenting the part of Matt Stone. And somewhere in the space between what the character is allowed to say and what the show is allowed to show, there is a question the series has been asking for nearly 30 years without quite answering. What does Eric Cartman actually feel when he thinks about Kyle Broflovsky? The answer the show keeps circling is not hate. Hate is simple. Hate wants distance. What Cartman exhibits is the opposite of distance. He is always finding ways to stay close. The show has one more piece of evidence for this theory that most people walk past because it is small and quiet and surrounded by things that are louder. In Kenny Dies, the episode where Kenny is actually dying, there is a moment where Cartman cries and Kyle holds him. We have already talked about this. But what is less examined is what Cartman does in that same episode outside of that moment. He discovers that the research being done on Kenny's condition, a muscular dystrophy variant called muscular dystrophy in the show, involves stem cells derived from fetuses. He organizes a pro-stem cell research campaign. He gives speeches, he meets with Congress, he gets on television. The episode reveals at the end that Cartman's motive was not Kenny's cure at all. He wanted the fetal tissue for a personal business scheme. The grief was not the point. The manipulation was the point. And yet the grief was real in that one moment. Cartman was genuinely sad in the hospital room. The scheme does not cancel the grief. They coexisted. This is the specific texture of the Cartman-Kyle-Kenny triangle that the show has built and never resolved. Cartman is capable of genuine feeling and consistent cruelty at the same time. His relationship with Kenny, like his relationship with Kyle, is both real and exploitative. And the realness does not excuse the exploitation, but the exploitation does not negate the realness either. The show's most precise statement about Cartman's inner life is probably the Cupid Me storyline in Cartman Finds Love. Cupid Me is a tiny winged version of Cartman, an imaginary sprite that follows him around offering romantic advice and celebrating when the people Cartman is trying to help find connection with each other. Cupid Me is Cartman's capacity for romantic investment made visible and given a separate body. He is the part of Cartman that wants love to work, that feels something when two people choose each other, that gets genuinely heartbroken when Tolkien and Nicole break up. When Cartman gets angry at Cupid Me for the failure, he does not just dismiss him. He beats him bloody with a baseball bat. This is significant. You do not beat something that does not matter to you with a baseball bat. You beat it because it represents something you cannot tolerate in yourself. Cartman is violent toward his own capacity for love because that capacity frightens him. It is exposed and vulnerable and impossible to control. And then, when he wants Cupid Me back, he pleads with him. He begs. He tells Cupid Me that there is still work to do. That he still believes in the possibility of what Cupid Me represents. That is not a villain. That is a person who is in enormous conflict about what he is allowed to want. Kyle, modeled on Matt Stone, the person Cartman is modeled not on but in opposition to, is the object of the most intense version of whatever Cartman feels that he cannot name. The show has been dramatizing this for almost 30 years and calling it a rivalry. But rivalries are about competition. This is something else. This is about need. What Kyle's time awareness means for his relationship with Cartman is a specific wrinkle in the theory that the fan community has noticed but not always fully developed. If Kyle knows that time is broken, and if he has known for a long time, then his insistence on engaging with Cartman is not the reflexive reaction of a kid who cannot disengage from someone who torments him. It is a considered choice made by someone who understands the loop and has decided that fighting Cartman is worth doing anyway. This matters because the standard reading of their dynamic puts Kyle at a disadvantage. He is reactive. Cartman initiates. Kyle responds, gets baited, loses his temper, falls into schemes he should have seen coming. He looks from the outside like someone who cannot learn, like someone who keeps touching the hot stove because he has not yet accepted that it is hot. But if Kyle is in his 30s in a 9-year-old body, he has touched that stove a great many times. He knows exactly how hot it is. He is not touching it because he has not learned. He is touching it because he has decided that a world where he does not engage with Cartman is worse than a world where he does. A world where Cartman's arguments go unanswered, where his cruelties go challenged, where his escalating behavior runs up against nothing but indifference, is a world that gets measurably worse. Kyle keeps arguing not because he thinks he will win, but because someone has to keep the argument going. Because if the argument stops, something important stops with it. There's a moment in Imagination Land where Kyle has to make the public statement that imaginary things are real, which will mean acknowledging that Cartman was right about leprechauns, and therefore fulfilling the terms of a bet that is humiliating for Kyle. He does not want to do it. He resists until there is no more resistance available. And then he does it. Because the alternative, a nuclear bomb destroying everything imaginative in the universe, is worse. He absorbs the humiliation because the stakes are higher than his own dignity. This is the calculus of someone who has been doing this for a long time. Not a child protecting his pride, an adult in a child's situation knowing the full cost of every option and choosing the one that preserves the most important things even when it costs him personally. Kyle does not like Cartman, but he needs Cartman to be challenged, and somewhere in the time loop he made the decision that he would be the one who keeps doing it. Not because it will eventually work, because the alternative is watching it go unchallenged, and that is something he decided a long time ago he was not willing to do. The theory also touches on what Kyle's relationship with Stan means in this context. Stan is modeled on Trey Parker, just as Kyle is modeled on Matt Stone. Their friendship is explicitly, by Parker and Stone's own description, meant to reflect their real friendship. Two people who are fundamentally different in temperament but complementary in the ways that matter. Stan gives Kyle permission to be the one who speaks. Kyle gives Stan a reason to care. If Kyle knows how long they have been doing this together, standing at the bus stop, going to school, fighting the battles that never stay won, then his friendship with Stan is the one thing in the loop that he would protect above everything else. Not because it changes anything, but because it is the place where the time loop does not feel like a prison. It feels like a choice. Now here is where things get complicated in the way that good theories always get complicated. Because if Cartman's obsession with Kyle is genuine, if there is something real underneath all the performance of cruelty, then we have to ask why Kyle keeps engaging with it, why he keeps coming back, why he has not, across 28 seasons, simply removed himself from Cartman's orbit and let the fixation run out of fuel. The next theory has an answer to this question, and it involves time. There is a fan theory about South Park that starts with a single line of dialogue from season 4 and builds from there into something that reframes every scene Kyle Broflovsky has ever been in. The theory is this: Kyle is the only person in South Park who knows that time is broken, and he has known it for a very long time. Here is the line. In The Tooth Fairy's Tats 2000, which aired in April of 2000 as the season 4 premiere, Kyle has a quiet conversation with Stan in which he says something that gets treated as philosophical rambling from a 9-year-old who has been thinking too hard. He says he is afraid he might not be real. He says he can sometimes see time slowing down. And then the conversation moves on, and the show never directly revisits it. That line sat in the fan community for years before someone built a full theory around it. The argument goes like this. South Park premiered in August of 1997. Kyle Broflovsky was approximately 8 or 9 years old when the show began. If you track his age against the pilot's internal logic, he would have been born in 1989. The show has now been running for almost 30 years. In that time, Kyle has aged approximately 2 years, maybe 3, depending on which episodes you consult. By any reasonable calculation, Kyle should be in his mid-30s. He's still attending 4th grade, he still lives with his parents, he still takes the same bus. And unlike almost every other character on the show, Kyle seems to feel the weight of this. Not always visibly, not in ways he can fully articulate to his friends, but there are moments across the series where the seams show. In Butt Out, Season 7, the boys find themselves in the middle of a tobacco company controversy, and Kyle explicitly comments that they continuously allow the same kinds of riotous situations to spiral out of control and then fix it the same way every time. He is describing a loop. He is describing the structure of the show from the inside. Stan and the others respond to this as if it is just Kyle being philosophical, which is how the show usually handles it. But the observation is accurate. They do keep doing the same thing. They always have. And Kyle is the one naming it. In Cartman-Land Season 5, Cartman inherits $1 million from his grandmother and buys an amusement park for his own exclusive use. Kyle, who has been struggling with the religious crisis of watching a terrible person be rewarded, gives his periodic speech about trying to be better. Cartman mocks him for it directly. He says Kyle gives that speech every week. Kyle does not deny it. He says he does it to try to better himself. Two characters in a children's cartoon are directly acknowledging that this exact conversation happens on a regular cycle and neither of them can stop it. The Reddit theory, which was highlighted in coverage by CBR and developed by fans across multiple threads, proposes that Kenny McCormick's resurrection cycle is the mechanism that traps the town in this loop. Every time Kenny dies and comes back through his mother, through the Cthulhu cult's influence on the McCormick bloodline, his resurrection creates a small temporal disturbance, a reset that does not wipe memory but does arrest biological time. The residents of South Park accumulate experiences and remember events, which is why the show has genuine continuity and character development, but they do not age. Their bodies stay in the same year they were in when the loop began. Most of the residents do not notice this because the mind smooths over the inconsistency. If you have always looked 9 years old, looking 9 years old does not feel wrong to you. The loop is invisible from the inside unless you are paying very close attention to the rate at which time moves outside of South Park versus inside it. Kyle is paying attention. The theory's most elegant detail is that Kyle's role in the group is uniquely suited to this kind of awareness. He is the moral center. He is the one who delivers the lessons. He is the character who, by design, reflects on what has happened and tries to extract meaning from it. This attentiveness, which the show uses to punctuate episodes with its satirical thesis, would also make him the first person to notice when the meaning never sticks, when the lesson gets learned and then forgotten, when the cycle repeats. By the theory's logic, Kyle is somewhere in his 30s in a 9-year-old body, attending the same school, fighting the same fights, watching the world change around his frozen town while he remains exactly where he was when the loop started. He knows that Kenny has died hundreds of times. He knows his speech about learning something today will be forgotten by next week. He gives it anyway because someone has to, and he's the only one who remembers giving it last time. This reframes Kyle's famous earnestness in a way that is genuinely melancholy. He is not earnest because he is naive. He is earnest in spite of knowing it will not hold. He keeps making the case for decency not because he believes the case will win, but because abandoning it entirely is the one thing he cannot bring himself to do, even knowing how this goes. You gotta do what you want to do, his chronic moral optimism, his insistence on arguing against Cartman even when arguing gets him nowhere, his reflexive trust in institutions even after those institutions have failed him dozens of times. None of these make sense as the behavior of a child who simply has not learned better. They make complete sense as the behavior of an adult consciousness that has been stuck in a loop long enough to know that learning better does not change anything and that the only thing left to do is keep showing up. There's also the matter of Kyle's Jewish faith, which the show returns to repeatedly. He is the only Jewish character in South Park. His religion is a source of mockery from Cartman, a source of genuine reflection for Kyle himself, and a thread that runs through some of the show's most earnest explorations of what it means to hold beliefs in a world that keeps punishing you for them. Kyle's faith sometimes wavers, but it never breaks. He questions it, he argues with it, he comes back to it. A person stuck in a time loop for 30 years, watching the same cycles repeat, the same cruelties happen, the same lessons go unlearned, would have every reason to stop believing in anything. The fact that Kyle keeps believing, keeps arguing, keeps trying, is either the most naive thing about him or the bravest, depending on how much weight you give to what he might actually know. That conversation in Season 4 where he said he could see time slowing down was not a 9-year-old thinking too hard. That was the moment Kyle first articulated something he had felt for a long time, something he did not have the framework to explain, something the show dropped into the dialogue and then carefully walked away from. Time does slow down in South Park. It has been slowing down for 30 years, and Kyle can feel it. He has always been able to feel it. That is not philosophy. That is a very specific, very lonely thing to know. Kyle's relationship with faith is part of this theory in ways that are worth sitting with. He argues with God, he questions whether any of it makes sense. He comes back to it not because the evidence supports it, but because abandoning it entirely feels like losing the last thing that is genuinely his. A person stuck in a time loop for 30 years would have a complicated relationship with faith. If you have watched the same prayers go unanswered, the same disasters happen, the same moral failures repeat, and you still believe in something, you are not believing on the basis of outcomes. You are believing in spite of outcomes. You are holding on to something that has nothing to do with evidence because evidence keeps pointing in the wrong direction. And you have decided that the wrong direction cannot be the whole story. Kyle's faith is not comfortable. It is not the faith of someone who has received confirmation. It is the faith of someone who keeps showing up to argue with the thing they cannot fully leave. The time loop theory suggests Kyle has been having this argument for a very long time, longer than anyone around him knows. He sits in Hebrew school and he goes to synagogue and he watches his family observe their traditions, and he does not tell them what he suspects about how long they have actually been in this particular December. Because what would he say? How do you explain to someone that you think time is broken and you are the only one who can tell? Stan is his best friend. Their friendship is explicitly modeled on the real friendship between Trey Parker and Matt Stone. Stan is the person Kyle would tell. And Kyle has never told Stan about the time slowing down. He has never told anyone. He made that one comment in season 4 and then closed the door on it. There is a possibility the theory does not often engage with, which is that Kyle has tried to have this conversation before. In a previous loop or an early pass through the timeline, he told Stan or he told someone and nothing changed. The information cannot be acted on. There is nothing to be done with the knowledge that time is frozen around you. You can know it and you can still not fix it. And so Kyle, who is pragmatic above everything else, decided somewhere along the way that carrying the knowledge alone was more useful than burdening anyone else with it. Because sharing it would just mean two people carrying something that neither of them can change. That is also something you do not learn to do in childhood. That is the decision of someone who has been sitting with a hard thing for a very long time. There is a question worth asking before we move deeper into the theories tonight, one that sits underneath all of them and gives them their shared weight. The question is, why does any of this matter? South Park has been on the air since 1997. In that time, the landscape of television changed almost completely. Cable gave way to streaming. Animation found new audiences and new forms. The show's early contemporaries, the things that surrounded it in the late 90s, have largely aged out of cultural relevance. South Park has not. It is still being made. New episodes are still airing. The theories are the audience's way of giving back to a show that has given them a lot. They are the product of the kind of love that wants to understand what it is loving. And what South Park has always been at its best is a show that takes the world seriously enough to mock it properly. The satire requires real investment. You cannot lampoon something you're not paying attention to. Every episode that skewered a political figure or a cultural moment or a national argument required Trey Parker and Matt Stone to look at that thing closely enough to find its absurdity, which means they had to be genuinely looking at the world. The show is their looking, rendered as 4 boys in the snow. And the theories are our looking, rendered as patterns in what they made. So when we talk about Kenny's curse, or Kyle's time awareness, or Cartman's buried conscience, we are also talking about the show asking questions about real things. What does it mean to carry something you did not choose? What does it feel like to know the truth and be unable to make anyone else hold it? What is the difference between cruelty and the performance of cruelty? And does the difference matter if the effects are the same? South Park has been asking these questions for 28 seasons. The theories are attempts to sit with the questions long enough to hear them. That is worth doing. That is why we are here tonight. Let's slow down for a moment. Get a little more comfortable. What we are going to talk about next is a theory that completely reframes the narrative structure of the entire show. Not just one character or one relationship, but the whole thing. The theory is that South Park, as a series, is not a neutral third-person narrative. It is a memory. Specifically, it is Leopold Butters Stotch, retelling the events of his childhood to a therapist, as an adult, years after the fact. This theory originated in the fan community and was developed across Reddit before being picked up in wider discussions of the show's structure. The logic behind it is beautiful in its simplicity, and once you hear it, you will find it very hard to unsee. Butters is introduced in the South Park pilot as a background character with no lines. He is a face in the crowd. Nobody. It is not until season 3 that he starts getting individual moments, and not until season 6 that he becomes a proper main character, brought in to replace Kenny after Kenny's permanent death at the end of season 5. By season 6, Butters is the 5th member of the group, the one who Cartman manipulates more than anyone else, the one who believes everything he is told, the one who cannot protect himself from the cruelty of people he considers his friends. By the later seasons, Butters is in therapy. This is confirmed in the show. He sees a therapist regularly. He has been assessed by school counselors. He has been to a conversion camp, a summer camp, a military school, and has had numerous encounters with professionals who are meant to help children navigate their emotional lives. Butters is, by the show's own admission, a kid who has accumulated enough damage that formal help has been deemed necessary. The theory asks a simple question: what would bring a person who experienced all of this to therapy as an adult? And the answer it suggests is that Butters is in that office, decades later, finally processing what happened to him in South Park. And the show is the account he gives. This explains things about the show that are otherwise difficult to account for. Butters is easily manipulated. He is trusting to the point of gullibility. He believes things that no rational person would accept. In Awesome O Season 8, Cartman pretends to be a robot named Awesome O, and Butters believes it entirely and genuinely forms an emotional attachment to the robot. In Casa Bonita Season 7, Cartman convinces Butters that a meteor has struck South Park and civilization has ended, that he is the only survivor. And Butters goes along with this for days, living in a refrigerator box he believes is a fallout shelter, and eating garbage he has been told is emergency rations. Butters did not question any of it, because Butters believed that his friend would not lie to him about something so important. If a child carries those kinds of experiences into adulthood and eventually gets into a therapist's office and starts telling the story, he would tell it the way he understood it at the time. He would tell it from inside his own perception. He would include the aliens and the magic and the Santa Claus fights and the man-bear pig and the talking Christmas poo, not as metaphors but as literal events, because that is how he experienced them. He was told they were real, he believed they were real, and in his memory they are real. This also explains the show's tonal inconsistencies. South Park shifts registers dramatically across its run. Some episodes are grounded and emotionally mature, carrying genuine weight about loss or family or identity. Others are purely absurdist, completely detached from any realistic emotional logic. If the show is a neutral third-person narrative, these shifts are production choices that sometimes work and sometimes do not. If the show is Butters' account, the shifts make perfect sense. Human memory is not consistent. Trauma distorts some events into something enormous and strips others of detail entirely. The episodes that feel the most grounded are the ones Butters remembers most clearly, the ones that hurt the most. The episodes that feel the most detached are the ones he is reconstructing from fragments or filtering through the coping mechanisms he developed to survive them. Every single major storyline in the show, looked at through this lens, passes through Butters at some point. He is almost never the protagonist, but he is almost always present. He witnesses things, he participates in things, he is used for things, and when he is not present directly, his absence is itself meaningful, because someone being told this story from the outside would not have access to everything that happened in rooms he was not in. The gaps in the show's continuity, the events that are never explained or followed up on, the threads that drop without resolution, could all be accounted for by the simple fact that Butters was not there for those parts. He is filling in what he can. The theory's most emotionally resonant implication is the reason Butters would be in that therapist's office at all. The show makes clear that he was mistreated, consistently, systematically, by both his friends and his parents. His mother and father ground him constantly for things he did not do. He is excluded from the group on a regular basis. He is used as a tool in other people's schemes. He is the character South Park uses when it needs someone to absorb cruelty and keep smiling, because Butters will always keep smiling. He does not know how to stop. That patience, that willingness to return and try again, to extend trust to people who have spent years breaking it, is the defining feature of Butters as a character. It is also the defining feature of someone who is still, years later, trying to make sense of what happened to them. still returning to the story, still looking for the version of it that makes it okay. Still sitting across from someone who's supposed to help and saying, "Let me start from the beginning." Leopold Stoch, sitting in a therapist's office, telling the story of 4 boys in a mountain town in Colorado and all the incredible, terrible, impossible things that happened to them. The therapist writing it down, and somewhere in the telling, trying to find the part where it stops hurting. There is a practical element of the Butters as narrator theory that rewards attention. In South Park's version of events, many of the show's most fantastical storylines require an in-universe explanation for how they could be known, documented, and told. When the boys go to Imagination Land, they are going somewhere nobody else can follow. When Cartman enacts his most elaborate schemes, they involve plans and machinations that are not fully visible to anyone standing outside them. When things happen in the future, in the COVID specials or the post-pandemic films, the story is somehow still being told. If Butters is the narrator, these gaps become interesting rather than puzzling. He fills them in from inference, from what he was told afterward, from what he read or heard or pieced together from the information available to him. He was not in every room, he does not have perfect knowledge, but he has had years, possibly decades, to assemble the story from all the pieces he could reach. And in the assembling, some things got clearer and some things got more distorted, which is exactly how memory works when you are trying to make something cohere that was chaotic when it happened. The COVID specials in particular are interesting through this lens. In post-COVID and the return of COVID, the boys are adults. They have jobs. They have drifted from each other. Kenny is dead again, this time from the virus rather than from a Cthulhu-adjacent supernatural event, and the people who were once his friends have to come back to South Park to deal with what he left behind. There is genuine grief in those specials, genuine weight to what it means to have grown up and grown apart. Stan left. Kyle stayed connected, but barely. Cartman converted to Judaism and married a woman named Yentl, and seems, impossibly, to have arrived somewhere that resembles contentment. This is not the story being told by someone who does not care about these people. This is the story being told by someone who has spent years wondering what happened to everyone, who has imagined multiple futures for the people he grew up with, and who is working through the implications of each one. It is a story told with love, even the parts that are terrible, even the parts that are cruel. Butters loved these people. He still does. That is why he is still telling the story. The Butters as narrator theory asks us to trust the most abused person in the room as our guide to understanding it. That is a specific kind of storytelling choice, and it is an interesting one because Butters' perspective is both the most innocent and the most informed. He has been hurt by everyone. He has trusted everyone. He has been in more rooms, watching more things happen than any other character. He sees it all through the filter of his own goodness, which distorts some things and clarifies others. Now let's talk about the character at the center of the story he would be telling. Because if Butters is the narrator, there is one person whose psychology he has watched more closely than anyone else. That is the show, if this theory is right. That has always been the show. Now we need to go back to Cartman, because there is something in his story that gets overlooked, something the show addressed directly in one of its strangest and most unexpectedly serious episodes, and it changes the way you look at everything he ever did. In Season 10, Episode 7, an episode called Tst, Leon Cartman has run out of options. She has tried 2 professional nannies from reality television programs. Nanny Stella from Super Nanny lasted 1 session before Cartman psychologically dismantled her, and she had to be institutionalized. The second nanny had a similar outcome. Leanne, in genuine despair, asks her doctor for another recommendation. The doctor sends her to Caesar Millen, the dog whisperer. Millen works. This is the shocking part. He treats Cartman like a dog, which is to say he treats him like someone who needs structure, who needs to understand where the boundaries are, who needs a consistent authority to define appropriate behavior. He takes Cartman on a leash. He nips at his neck when he misbehaves, and slowly, methodically, it begins to take effect. Cartman starts doing his homework. He eats meals that were not fried. He stops throwing tantrums. He is measurably becoming something other than what he has always been. The other boys cannot believe what they are seeing. The episode plays this partly as comedy, Cartman on a leash being walked around the neighborhood, But it is also genuinely unsettling because the show is doing something it almost never does. It is showing you that Cartman could have been different, that the person he is was not inevitable, that somewhere underneath the bigotry and the manipulation and the cruelty was a kid who responded to being treated like he was worth the effort of discipline. And then the episode reaches its final act and everything changes. Cartman is alone in his room. He knows he is changing. He watches himself becoming more cooperative, more reasonable, more connected to other people, and he recognizes it as something he does not want. He devises a plan to eliminate Leon so that the structure Millen has imposed can be dismantled. But before he can execute the plan, something stops him. His conscience appears. The show literalizes this. Cartman has a vision, a kind of internal confrontation, in which a smaller version of himself, representing the part of him that is connected to decency and care, makes the case that the changes are good, that Cartman is happier, that this is what he could be. The two sides fight, and then Cartman vomits black fluid onto the floor. The show frames this in Leon's description when she finds him passed out, as possibly the evil within him. Cartman wakes up, eats a healthy breakfast, is briefly cooperative and pleasant, and then Leanne's enabling patterns reassert themselves, and the black fluid, whatever it represented, is gone, and Cartman is back. The final shot shows him returning to his normal self, looking at the camera with a small, satisfied, sinister smile. This is not a throwaway moment. The show designed this ending carefully. It established on screen that Cartman has a conscience, not a metaphorical one, not the abstract kind every person is supposed to have. A literal entity within him that was powerful enough to nearly override his established personality. And then it showed that entity being expelled, vomited out like a toxin his body was rejecting. The fan theory that builds from this episode asks the next logical question. If that conscience was real, and if its expulsion was real, then what does that mean for every moment of apparent decency in Cartman's history? Because there are moments, not many, but they are there. The Cartman who cries at Kenny's deathbed in Kenny Dies is not performing. Even accounting for his manipulative tendencies, the grief reads as genuine. There is no audience for it in that scene. No strategic advantage to being sad. He is sad because his friend is dying and he does not know what to do with that. In Fish Stick Season 13, Cartman inserts himself into credit for a joke that Jimmy Valmer actually wrote, convincing himself through increasingly elaborate self-deception that he co-wrote it. The episode is about ego and plagiarism, but there is a moment where Cartman, to protect the version of events he has constructed, is willing to put himself in genuine danger. He stands between Jimmy and Kanye West's anger. He is willing to be hurt. The episode frames this as Cartman protecting his false narrative. But there is something in the gesture that looks almost like loyalty, filtered through layers of self-interest but still there. There are the moments documented in the show's internal character histories where Cartman goes out of his way to protect Stan in certain situations, where his actual friendship with Butters, beneath all the manipulation, involves genuine affection, an affection Cartman could never admit to without dismantling the persona he has built. The black fluid theory suggests these moments are the conscience surviving, remnants of what was expelled in that Season 10 bedroom still finding their way through. Cartman tried to vomit out his empathy, but it was too deeply embedded to remove entirely, so it surfaces occasionally, briefly, in moments he cannot fully control, before he shoves it back down and returns to the person he has decided to be. This reframes his entire character arc in a way that is strangely sadder than reading him as simply a sociopath. A sociopath does not have a conscience to expel. Cartman had one. He knew he had one. He felt it trying to change him. And he made the choice, alone in his room at whatever age he was in Season 10, to reject it, to hold himself deliberately in the shape of the worst version of himself because that version felt safer, because that version had control. The show never explains what Cartman might have been if Leon had gotten help sooner, if the structure had arrived before the patterns had calcified, if someone had treated him like he was worth the effort of discipline before the cruelty had become his whole identity. Tst is the one episode where the show lets itself imagine that alternative and then closes the door on it. Cartman looks at the camera with that small, satisfied smile. The evil is back, the conscience is gone, and the show moves on. But does it stay gone? The evidence suggests it does not. There is a running category of moments in South Park that fans sometimes call Cartman's weak spots. These are the scenes where his cruelty falters, not in a way that drives a storyline, but just in a flash, a flicker, something that passes across his face or slips into his voice before the armor reassembles. They happen in enough episodes across enough seasons that they cannot be accidents. They represent something the writers keep returning to, a question about the character that the show refuses to answer cleanly. In It's Christmas in Canada Season 7, Cartman tracks the journey across Canada to help Ike return to Kyle's family. He is terrible throughout. He manipulates, he prioritizes his own comfort. He makes Kyle miserable in the ways Cartman always makes Kyle miserable. And then, when it is over, when the mission is accomplished and they are back in South Park, there is a brief moment where he could gloat, and he does not. He does not congratulate Kyle. He does not take credit. He makes an insult, covers the moment with something mean, and walks away. The insult is the tell. You only need to cover a moment that might otherwise show you cared. In Scott Tenorman Must Die Season 5, the episode that Parker and Stone cite as the moment the show discovered what Cartman truly was, Cartman orchestrates one of the most elaborate and genuinely horrifying acts of revenge in animated television history. He tricks Scott Tenorman into situations that result in Scott's parents being killed, then feeds Scott the parents in a chili and has Radiohead tell Scott that crying is not cool. It is a truly dark piece of television. The show plays it as Cartman's greatest triumph. But there is a detail that gets less attention than the chili. Cartman had to plan this across an entire season. He had to think about it every day. He had to maintain the performance of defeat while secretly constructing the revenge. And in the episode, when he finally reveals the scheme, his satisfaction is enormous, but it is also briefly, almost imperceptibly, exhausted. He looks at Scott Tenorman, and he looks tired. Not regretful, but tired in the way that someone is tired when they have spent a long time doing something that required all of their attention. The conscience theory suggests that Cartman is always fighting, that every act of cruelty requires him to push past whatever the black fluid was trying to protect. That the tiredness is not just completion, but effort. That being Cartman is work, constant work, the work of maintaining a persona against the pressure of what is underneath it. This is a harder read on the character than the simpler one, which is that Cartman is a sociopath, and his moments of apparent feeling are just better than average performances. The harder read says he is genuinely in conflict, that he feels things he does not want to feel and has spent his entire life constructing elaborate reasons not to act on them. And that somewhere in the basement of everything he does, there is something that is still, against his best efforts, trying to be a person. Here is something that was in the show from the very beginning and that most people only recognized after it had already happened. Randy Marsh was always supposed to be the main character. Stan was the cover story. This is not a fan theory in the traditional sense. By the time of season 23, the show had made it official. Randy is described in the show's own production language as having become the series' main character, beginning with the Tegrity Farm storylines. But the theory goes further than simply noting that the show changed focus over time. The theory holds that the seeds of this were present from Randy's earliest appearances, that the structural shift was not a late-season creative decision, but the completion of an arc that Parker and Stone had been building toward, maybe without fully knowing it since the show began. Randy Marsh is voiced by Trey Parker. Stan Marsh is also voiced by Trey Parker. Both characters are modeled in different ways on Parker himself. Stan is the version of Parker at 9 years old, the decent kid who wants to do the right thing, who gets overwhelmed by the world's insanity, who is embarrassed by the chaos around him and longs for normalcy. Randy is the version of Parker as an adult, which is to say the version that has access to power and resources and still manages to act like a child who cannot regulate his impulses, who chases cultural moments without understanding them, who craves admiration from people he should not need to impress. The early Randy moments are read in retrospect as early symptoms. He shouts a racial slur on Wheel of Fortune in season 11. In the episode With Apologies to Jesse Jackson, a storyline that is ostensibly about Stan learning to understand his father's mistake, but is really about watching an adult man act with the maturity of someone much younger and cause enormous collateral damage. He fights with parents at every one of Stan's sporting events. He takes every fad that hits South Park and overcorrects into it with embarrassing commitment. His obsession with Guitar Hero, his brief career as a geologist insisting on the importance of his studies, his extended phase as the pop star lord in seasons 17 and 18. What all of these storylines have in common is that Randy is not a background character who occasionally takes the spotlight. He is a character in active pursuit of something. He wants to be seen, he wants to be admired, he wants to be at the center of whatever matters. And he keeps failing at this in ways that are both funny and recognizable because they are the failures of someone who has never been told, clearly enough to believe it, that it is okay to be ordinary. Integrity Farms, introduced in Season 22, Episode 4, an episode literally titled Integrity Farms, changes the show's geography in a way that cannot be understated. Randy moves the family to a farm in rural Colorado. He starts growing marijuana, he builds a business, he becomes gradually a marijuana mogul who is so consumed by protecting and growing his brand that his relationship with his wife deteriorates, his children are essentially on their own, and the moral center of the family, which had always nominally been either Randy or Sharon, is simply absent. From season 22 onward, entire arcs of the show are driven by what Randy wants and what Randy does to get it. The boys, including Stan, become the people who react to what Randy has set in motion. This is a fundamental reversal of the show's original structure, where the boys were the agents and the adults were the obstacle. Now Randy is the agent, and everyone else is the obstacle or the audience. The theory's most interesting claim is that this was always where the show was going, because Parker has always been more interested in Randy than in Stan. Stan is the ideal. Stan is who you want to be. Principled, clear-eyed, disgusted by nonsense, capable of genuine feeling. Randy is who Parker is. Which is to say, Randy is who most adults actually are when they stop performing the version of themselves they think other people want. He is selfish and impulsive and creative and charismatic and deeply insecure and willing to do things he should not do for reasons that make perfect sense to him and no sense to anyone watching. There is a moment in season 22 that Parker himself has cited as the clearest statement of what Integrity Farms is actually about. Randy is standing in his marijuana field and Sharon confronts him about prioritizing the farm over their family. Randy says, without irony, that the farm is what he was meant to do, that this is his purpose, that he has found, finally, the thing that makes his life feel like it matters. And Sharon just looks at him exhausted because she has watched him have this exact revelation about a dozen different things over the course of their marriage. Each time it was the thing. Each time it faded. Each time Randy moved on to the next version of the same story. Randy Marsh is not a bad man. That is what makes him interesting. He loves his family in his way. He is not indifferent to their pain. But he is constitutionally incapable of putting his own need for significance after his family's need for him to just show up and be present. The show watched this man spiral through 20 seasons of smaller versions of this same failure and then, in season 22, gave him something big enough to fail at properly. Stan, watching from the periphery of his father's latest obsession, is doing what he has always done. He is embarrassed, he is patient, he is holding on to the hope that eventually his dad will land somewhere stable and stay there. The theory says Stan was never the main character, he was the witness, the person through whom we were introduced to this family and this town and this father and this story. The story was always going to be Randy's. It was always going to be about a man in a perpetual state of becoming, never quite arriving, always certain that the next thing would be the real thing, standing in a marijuana field in rural Colorado, absolutely convinced that this time he has finally figured it out. Parker said in his own words that Cartman is both of their dark sides. If that is true, then Randy is Parker's honest side, the part that does not get filtered through satire or shock value. Just a man, wanting to matter, getting it wrong, getting it mostly wrong, standing in the snow in Colorado, trying again. Randy's relationship with Sharon is the clearest window into what the show is actually doing with his character. Sharon is not a long-suffering saint. She is a person with her own needs, her own frustrations, her own complicated feelings about the life she has built. She loves Randy in the way that people love someone they have been with for a long time, imperfectly, with the full knowledge of his failures and the full weight of having to keep deciding that the whole of him is worth the parts that exhaust her. Their marriage across the show's run is one of its most consistent threads. They fight, they separate, they come back together. Randy does something genuinely terrible or spectacularly stupid, and Sharon has to decide, again, whether this is the thing she cannot get past. She usually decides it is not. This is not weakness. This is the show being honest about what sustained relationships actually look like when one partner is constitutionally unable to stop pursuing the next version of himself. In season 22, Sharon buys into Tegrity Farms alongside Randy. She wanted it too initially. The move to the farm was not purely Randy's imposition. They chose it together. And then Randy's obsession with the business consumed everything, and Sharon found herself in a new place that had become just another version of the old problem. She is still there. They are still together. The marriage is intact in a way that should not probably be possible given the volume of things that happened inside it. The theory about Randy as protagonist carries an implication about Sharon that the show does not always honor but keeps circling. She is not just the audience for Randy's story. She is a person who could have built a different life and chose this one. That choice, made again and again across season after season, is its own kind of stubbornness, its own kind of commitment to something she cannot fully explain, which makes Sharon, in a quiet way, the show's most realistic portrait of a human being, someone who knows better and keeps choosing the thing anyway because the knowing and the choosing are both real, and they do not always point in the same direction. Randy Marsh stands in his field with complete conviction that this is the thing, and somewhere on the other side of town, his son stands at a bus stop with complete awareness that it probably is not. The distance between them is the distance between what we believe about ourselves and what the people who know us best can see. Now let's look at what happens when that distance is not spatial but temporal, when the gap is not between father and son but between what time should be doing and what it is actually doing. We have talked about Kenny's curse, we have talked about Kyle's awareness. Now let's put those two things together, because the theory that connects them is one of the more structurally elegant ideas in the South Park fan community, and it asks a question the show has never stopped dancing around. What if the reason the boys in South Park never grow up is not a narrative convenience? What if it is a consequence? Specifically, what if it is a consequence of what Kenny McCormick's resurrection does to time? The premise builds on two things we have already established. First, the Cthulhu cult's influence on the McCormick bloodline means that every time Kenny dies, his mother gives birth to him again through some supernatural mechanism tied to the cult's connection with an immortal elder god. This is not speculation. This is explicitly shown in season 14. Second, Kyle feels the passage of time in ways the other characters do not. He can see it slowing down. He describes this in a season 4 premiere, and the show drops it there. The theory, developed across fan forums and picked up in coverage by outlets including CBR, proposes the following. Kenny's resurrection is not a passive event. It does not simply restore him. It creates a temporal disturbance, a small resetting wave that radiates outward from the McCormick household every time he comes back. This wave does not erase memory. People in South Park retain what has happened to them, which is why the show has genuine continuity, why events from earlier seasons are referenced in later ones, why characters grow and develop even without physically aging. But the wave does arrest biological time. It keeps everyone in the town, and possibly the town itself, locked at approximately the age and state they were in when the loop began. Think about what this means for the show's internal geography. South Park has been the site of alien invasions, terrorist attacks, supernatural infestations, multiple apocalyptic scenarios, and numerous events that would have visibly reshaped any real town. But each time, South Park returns to something recognizably similar to what it was. The show usually attributes this to cartoon logic, the implicit understanding that an animated comedy resets its setting between episodes. The time loop theory says it is not reset by narrative convention. It is reset by physics, by the ripple effect of one boy being pulled back from death over and over again, creating a kind of temporal scar tissue around the entire community. The boys do not age because they live in the radius of Kenny's resurrection. The adults do not age because they live in the same radius. The buildings repair themselves, the town reconstitutes itself. The year stays approximately the same because whatever mechanism brings Kenny back is broad enough in its effect to hold the entire ecosystem in stasis. This also explains something about the show that has puzzled attentive watchers for years. South Park exists in real time in a very specific way. The show comments on current events within days of them happening. Episodes have been turned around in 6 days and aired while the news cycle was still active. This means the show occupies a specific present moment at all times, but it also means the characters exist in a present that keeps updating around them without the characters themselves updating. They are still 9 years old, but they are watching a world that is now almost 3 decades older than when they first appeared. The time loop offers a way to read this that is more coherent than simply calling it a floating timeline. The world ages because it is outside the radius. South Park does not age because it is inside it. The boys live in a bubble created by death and resurrection, suspended in a permanent present, watching everything change around them while the snow keeps falling and the bus keeps coming and Kenny keeps dying. Kenny does not know he is the engine of this. He knows about his own immortality. He knows about the cult. He knows the line from Lovecraft that the goth kids showed him about something that cannot die, and time eventually ceasing to affect it. But there is no indication in the show that Kenny has connected his own death cycle to the temporal stasis of the town around him. He experiences the loop from the inside, dying and coming back, feeling the loneliness of it, trying to make the others understand. He does not know that every resurrection sends a wave outward that keeps his friends the same age, that his curse is also their preservation, that in dying for them over and over, he is giving them a kind of immortality they never asked for and do not know they have. Kyle knows something is wrong with time. He can feel the stasis. But he does not know Kenny is the cause. He has never made that connection because the show has never given him the information he would need to make it. And Kenny, who knows more about his own mechanics than anyone, has never been given a reason to look outward at the effect his deaths have on the world around him. The show has given Kenny one moment of full clarity that the time loop theory makes more poignant in retrospect. In South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, the theatrical film released in June of 1999, Kenny sacrifices himself to save the world. He literally goes to hell, makes a deal, defeats Satan's invasion, and in the process is finally, for the first time in the show's history, given wings and a halo and welcomed into heaven properly. The film ends with Kenny ascending. It is the closest thing to a resolution his character has ever received. And then the show came back the following season and he was just there again at the bus stop. The film's ending works emotionally because it treats Kenny's sacrifice as meaningful and final. His death matters. His choice matters. The fact that he was willing to die for people who have forgotten every previous version of his death is presented as the most heroic thing anyone in South Park has done. He knew the cycle. He knew it would probably keep going. He went into it anyway. The time loop theory looks at this and asks whether that sacrifice reset the loop. Whether Kenny's most consequential death, the one that was supposed to be the ending, was undone by the same mechanism that has been undoing all the others. Whether the wave went out, as it always does, and South Park came back to its default state, the boys the same age, the town the same shape, everything approximately as it was. There is something almost cosmically unfair about this if it is true. The one death that should have counted, the one that was complete and acknowledged and celebrated, was still absorbed by the machine and returned to factory settings like everything else. Kenny got his halo. The halo got taken back. He got his parka. He went back to the bus stop. He did not stop going. That is the detail the theory always returns to. He got his wings and came back and found himself in the orange parka again and went to the bus stop because that is what you do. You go to the bus stop, you wait for the bus, you go to school, even if you know what is going to happen, even if you have died enough times to have formed an opinion about it, even if the one death that was supposed to be the last one turned out not to be. The loop is a machine that runs on his losses, and he is the only one who knows it. And he shows up anyway, every morning, in the orange parka, standing in the snow. The time loop theory has an implication for the adults in South Park that is worth sitting with because the adults age differently than the boys in a way the show almost never acknowledges directly. Randy Marsh is not 9 years old. He is, depending on which episode you consult, somewhere in his 40s. His parents are alive and elderly. His body is visibly that of a middle-aged man who has made many poor dietary and lifestyle choices. By the theory's logic, the temporal stasis created by Kenny's death cycle would have to operate differently on adults than on children, or the adults would simply not be aging at all, which contradicts what the show shows. The theory accounts for this with a geographic distinction rather than a categorical one. The stasis is strongest in the places where Kenny spends the most time. His house, the bus stop, South Park Elementary, the immediate radius of his daily life. In these spaces, time is essentially frozen. The boys do not age, the school does not change. The dynamics of the fourth grade classroom have been in place for almost 30 years without producing any graduation. But the adults move through more of the town than the boys do. They drive to other cities, they travel, they work in environments that are partially outside the radius. Randy goes to geological sites, Sharon works. Sheila is involved in community organizations that take her throughout Park County. The stasis that holds the boys perfectly frozen has a weaker effect on people who spend portions of their time outside its most concentrated field. This is why the adults show the markers of aging, graying hair, the particular fatigue of middle life, without aging at the rate that real time would demand, while the boys stay exactly the same. It also explains why the adults in South Park do things that the show itself treats as inexplicable, why they panic at the same things repeatedly, why they form mobs around the same issues in slightly different packaging every few seasons, why they are, as a collective, slightly easier to manipulate than any group of adults with their level of experience should be. The stasis affects their reasoning even when it is not preventing their bodies from aging. They are caught in loops of behavior the same way the boys are caught in loops of age, just less visibly. Randy's periodic belief that the current thing is the most important thing he has ever discovered, marijuana, Lord, geological survey, a new kind of sauce, reflects this. He is not simply erratic, he is someone whose capacity for learning from past experience is mildly but consistently impaired by living at the edge of a temporal field that prevents things from fully settling into permanent memory. He starts fresh more easily than he should because the loop nudges him toward fresh starts. It is not dramatic, it does not announce itself. It is just a slight difficulty retaining the lesson that should have prevented the next mistake. The loop is not only Kenny's prison, it is the town's ambient condition, and the town does not know it is in it, except for one boy who can sometimes see time slowing down, standing at the bus stop in his Oshanka hat, waiting for a bus that is always exactly on time. They are connected. They have always been connected. The most perceptive boy in South Park and the boy who keeps dying are both half of the same answer, and neither of them has ever been in the same room with the right question. The loop goes on. Kenny dies. His mother cries. The wave goes out. The snow keeps falling. Stan and Kyle and Cartman walk to the bus stop in the morning. They are still 9 years old. They have been 9 years old for almost 30 years. And somewhere, Kenny wakes up in his bed, feeling the accumulated weight of every death he has ever had, and gets ready for another day. This next theory is compact as theories go. It does not require a sprawling architecture of evidence. It is built on one specific episode, one specific medical procedure, and one question about what happens when you give a person a piece of someone else's biology. In Cartman's Incredible Gift, which aired in Season 8 in the fall of 2004, Cartman attempts to fly off a roof using homemade wings after seeing a news report about a local man who survived a fall and then exhibited psychic abilities. Cartman is convinced that surviving a fall from a great enough height will give him psychic powers. He jumps. He falls. He does not develop psychic powers, but he does sustain serious injuries that require hospitalization. During his recovery, he receives a corneal transplant. A donated cornea replaces damaged tissue in his eye. The episode then develops into a story about the police department hiring Cartman as a psychic detective because he correctly identifies several crime suspects through what turns out to be wild guessing and profiling. The cornea itself is largely treated as a setup detail. The show moves on. The fan theory asks one question the episode never answers. Where did the donated cornea come from? The argument, which circulated in fan forums and was documented in coverage by outlets including Digital Spy and Looper, proposes that the cornea came from Kenny McCormick, not through any dramatic chain of events, but simply through the standard processes of organ donation. Kenny dies constantly. His body presumably cycles through the standard posthumous logistics at some point, at least in the earlier seasons when his deaths were more conclusive seeming. A cornea from a brain-dead donor is one of the most commonly donated tissue types. The timing works, the availability works, and if the cornea came from Kenny, then Cartman is now carrying a piece of Kenny's biology in his eye. The theory's extension is that this donated tissue gives Cartman something like perceptual access to Kenny's experience, not full psychic sight, not the ability to see what Kenny sees in real time, but a residual connection to Kenny's perspective on death and mortality. This is why, across the later seasons, Cartman occasionally demonstrates awareness of Kenny's death cycle that the others do not share. He knows sometimes before he should. He refers to Kenny's deaths in ways that suggest recognition rather than simple observation. This is a smaller theory than most of what we have discussed tonight, but it has a kind of narrative elegance that holds up under examination. The show has established through various storylines that biological material can carry identity. In Medicinal Fried Chicken, Season 14, Randy deliberately gives himself testicular cancer via radiation to qualify for a marijuana prescription, and his subsequent life with his enormously enlarged testicles reshapes his entire daily existence and his relationship with Sharon. The show treats the body as something that changes who you are when it changes. Butter's various medical misadventures involve similar logic. The show is not squeamish about the idea that flesh carries consequences. The cornea theory suggests that Cartman's anomalous awareness of Kenny's reality is not supernatural, not psychic, not a narrative convenience, it is biological. He is seeing through one eye something of what Kenny's world looks like. A world defined by death and return, and the specific clarity that comes from knowing things end and keep ending, and you're the only one who remembers. It is, in its way, one of the most intimate things that could happen between these two characters. Not friendship, not alliance, but a piece of one person's experience living permanently inside another person's body, providing a window onto a reality that would otherwise be completely invisible. Cartman would find this intolerable if he knew. He finds most things intolerable, but he does not know. He just carries the eye and occasionally feels, without understanding why, that he knows something about death that the others do not. There is one more layer to the eye transplant theory that makes it worth holding on to. The eye Kenny donated was an eye that had seen his own death. Multiple times. Whatever the visual memory of dying and returning looks like from the inside, Kenny's donated cornea carries the biological trace of it. Cartman, who has no supernatural connection to the cycle on his own, would have no framework for processing these residual impressions. He would not know what they were. He would experience them as intuitions, as the occasional sense that something was about to go wrong. As the moments where his reaction to Kenny's death has a quality of recognition that the others' reactions do not. This theory also does something interesting to the question of why Cartman, of all the boys, is the one who has shown the most awareness of Kenny's deaths over the seasons. Not consistent awareness, not the full consciousness that Kenny himself has, but more awareness than Stan and Kyle, who almost always receive each death as a fresh surprise. Cartman sometimes seems to have expected it, sometimes seems to know something is different before the others do. Sometimes, in the early seasons especially, his response to Kenny dying has a quality that is one half theatrical performance and one half something genuine that he is covering with performance. The eye is one explanation for this. Not a psychic connection, just biology doing what biology does, carrying history in its structure, informing the body that carries it in ways that are too subtle to be named and too consistent to be ignored. Two bodies, one small shared piece of seeing. One boy who knows everything about what it means to die in this town. One boy who knows nothing but has been given, without asking, a fragment of the view from inside the knowing. South Park is built on connections like this. Established in throwaway lines, visited occasionally, never resolved. The show treats its own mythology with a kind of comfortable disregard, building it when it is useful and ignoring it when it is not. But the connections are there if you look for them. They were always there. The eye transplant theory is the smallest of our 9 theories tonight. It operates at the level of one specific biological detail in one specific episode. But it matters because it points toward something the larger theories also point toward. The idea that connections in South Park are not always visible, not always acknowledged, not always chosen, but that they persist anyway, through bodies, through time, through the strange physics of a town that was never supposed to work the way it does. And none of those invisible connections are stranger or more carefully built then the one belonging to the character we need to talk about last. And now we arrive at the theory that has always been sitting at the edge of the show's vision, visible if you look directly at it, and easy to miss if you are paying attention to everything else. This is the theory about Leopold Stach, about what he actually is and what the show has been building him toward. This is the theory that Butters is the most dangerous person in South Park, and that Professor Chaos, his supervillain alter ego, is not a joke at all. Let's build this one from the ground up because it requires understanding Butters in sequence, starting with where he came from. As established, Butters enters the show as a background character. He has no lines in Season 1. He is literally a face in the crowd, a figure the animators put there to populate scenes. He begins getting individual moments in Seasons 2 and 3, small parts where he reacts to what the main boys are doing. By Season 4, he is recognizably Butters, the innocent, trusting, slightly strange boy who lives down the street. And then Kenny dies permanently at the end of Season 5, and Butters is drafted as his replacement. Season 6, Episode 1 is the episode titled Jared Has AIDS. It is the episode where Butters officially becomes the fourth member of the group in Kenny's absence. And the first significant thing that happens to Butters in his new role is that Cartman uses him as a fall guy in a scheme involving liposuction credits and celebrity endorsements. Butters, believing he is participating in something legitimate, takes the blame for something he did not do and is punished for it. This is the template for the next decade of his character's life. He is brought in, he is used, he is discarded when he is no longer convenient. He is punished for other people's choices. The show does this over and over and over again. It becomes so consistent that it starts to feel like a thesis statement. South Park is many things, but one of the things it is, especially during its middle seasons, is a show about what happens to the person who keeps absorbing everyone else's consequences. Butters is that person. He gets grounded by his parents for things he did not do. He gets excluded from the group for reasons that have nothing to do with him. He is manipulated, tricked, lied to, and experimented on. He is sent to a camp designed to suppress his sexuality based on a misunderstanding. He is institutionalized. He is put through military school. He has had more adverse experiences per season than any other character on the show, including Kenny, because at least Kenny's suffering is finite. Kenny dies, and it is over. Butters wakes up the next morning, and the consequences are still there. And here's the thing about Butters that the show eventually reveals, slowly and then all at once. He handles it. Not well sometimes, not without damage, but he keeps going, he keeps showing up. He keeps believing against all evidence that the people around him are fundamentally good and that things will be better. This quality, which presents as pure naivety, is something different when you look at it across the full run of the show. It is resilience. It is an almost supernatural capacity to absorb pain without becoming hardened by it. And then there is the Imagination Land trilogy. Season 11, episodes 10 through 12, aired in October and November of 2007. The storyline involves the boys gaining access to Imagination Land, a realm where all fictional and imaginary characters exist. The realm comes under attack from evil imaginary beings. The government is involved. There is a nuclear missile being aimed at Imagination Land to destroy the evil characters, which would also destroy the good ones. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, Butters is identified as the key. Aslan, the lion from the Chronicles of Narnia, tells Butters that he is the chosen one, not because of any special training or natural ability in the conventional superhero sense, but because of his imagination. Aslan says that Butters has been given the gift of imagination in a way that other children have not, that his capacity to create and sustain imaginary things is not ordinary, that it is powerful enough to change the balance of the entire realm. This is not played entirely straight. The Imagination Land trilogy is comedy. But the canon is real and unambiguous. The military recognizes Butters as uniquely necessary. Aslan recognizes him. The imaginary characters themselves recognize him. When Butters imagines characters into existence in Imagination Land, those characters are more stable, more real, more powerful than ones created by anyone else. He imagines Santa Claus and Santa arrives wielding a golden axe. He imagines a bear with a bow and arrow and the bear begins fighting. He is described as getting stronger as the battle goes on. The Chosen One title is given to him without irony. and then the episode ends. Butters goes home. Nobody debriefs him. Nobody follows up on the fact that a 9-year-old from South Park just functioned as the single most powerful being in an alternate dimension during a cosmic battle between good and evil. He just goes back to being Butters. This is where the theory crystallizes. Think about what the show has given Butters. He has an imagination powerful enough to sustain and create life in an entire separate reality. He has a resilience that allows him to absorb almost unlimited adversity without breaking. He is surrounded by people who underestimate him completely, which means he has operated for his entire life in an environment where his actual capabilities have never been accounted for. And he has been hurt systematically by almost every person in his life. Those are not the qualities of a background character. Those are the origin story of something. Professor Chaos was introduced in Season 6, Episode 6, in an episode literally titled Professor Chaos. After being kicked out of the group for the final time by Stan, Kyle, and Cartman, Butters retreats to his room and decides that if no one will let him belong anywhere, he will find a purpose in opposition. He builds a supervillain costume from household materials, aluminum foil, and cardboard, and declares himself Professor Chaos. General Disarray is his sidekick. His schemes begin small. He plans to flood the world using a garden hose. He plans to change the menu at a local restaurant. He plans to cover the world in darkness using a piece of cardboard and a flashlight. The show plays this for comedy. His plans are hopelessly out of scale. The world keeps going, nobody notices. General Disarray points out that some of his schemes have already been done by other villains, which distresses Butters enormously. He is not an effective villain. He is a very small person trying to impose himself on a world that keeps ignoring him. But here is the detail that the theory rests on. He does not stop. Professor Chaos is not a phase. It is not something Butters does for one episode and puts away when the story is over. The character persists. He comes back. He shows up in the superhero arcs of Season 13 and 14 as a recognized villain within the show's internal mythology. By the time the Coon and Friends arc happens, Professor Chaos has a cell, a reputation, and a meaningful role in the moral architecture of the South Park superhero world. He was built from cardboard and aluminum foil and heartbreak, and he outlasted almost everything. The theory asks what happens if Butters' imagination and resilience, which we know are extraordinary, are ever turned fully toward Professor Chaos instead of being divided between being a good person and being a supervillain as a coping mechanism. What happens when the chosen one of Imagination Land, who is capable of manifesting literal armies from his will alone, decides to stop limiting himself? The show has never fully answered this question. It has let Butters continue to exist in the middle ground, perpetually kind, perpetually abused, perpetually containing something enormous that is rarely given full permission to emerge. But the pieces are all there, laid out across 14 seasons. His imagination is confirmed to be uniquely powerful. His endurance is confirmed to be extraordinary. His alter ego is confirmed to be persistent and recognized as a real threat within the show's world. And his list of grievances against the people around him is longer than any other character's, longer than Kenny's, which is about death and memory, longer than Kyle's, which is about feeling invisible inside an unfair system, longer than Cartman's, which is about abandonment and lack of structure. Butters' grievances are specific and relational and accumulated one Tuesday at a time across years. In Doubling Down, Season 21, Butters watches Heidi Turner considering leaving Cartman, and he makes the argument for staying. Not because he believes Cartman is good, not because he thinks the relationship will improve. He does it because, he tells her, he believes in people's capacity to be better. He has seen people change. He knows it is possible. He is choosing, with full information, to hope. This is either the sweetest moment in the show's run or the most chilling, depending on how you read it. Because Butters is not naive in that scene. He is not a child who does not understand what he is saying. He is someone who has processed every terrible thing that has been done to him and arrived at hope as a deliberate choice, which is a very different thing from hope as ignorance. A person who chooses hope in the face of everything Butters has faced is not weak. A person who chooses hope, who still has that choice available after everything, who still has that much intact to protect, is someone who has not yet spent what they have. Someone who is, in some fundamental sense, still whole. And when you combine that wholeness with an imagination powerful enough to reshape a reality, with a resilience that has survived everything South Park has thrown at it, with a supervillain alter ego that has been quietly evolving for decades, you are not looking at a background character. You are looking at someone the show has been protecting from the full implications of what they are. The joke about Professor Chaos is that his schemes are small, that he fails, that the world does not notice him. But the joke requires you to assume that the size of the schemes reflects the limit of his ability. And the Imagination Land trilogy proved that it does not. He simply has not chosen yet to go bigger. Butters Stotch is the kindest character on South Park. He is also, potentially, the most capable. And those two things are not in conflict. They are the same thing, held in tension, waiting. For what, the show has never quite said, but the materials are all there. The patience, the power, the grievances, the alter ego. The question is not whether Butters could change South Park fundamentally if he decided to. The question is what would have to happen for him to decide. The show has been edging toward an answer to this for a long time. Not directly, not in a way that commits to the theory or confirms it, but in the patterns that keep recurring around Butters, in the way the show keeps returning to him in moments of genuine consequence. In Going Native Season 16, Butters discovers that he is actually from Hawaii. His anger, which he has been suppressing his entire life, begins to emerge. The episode reveals that what the adults in Butters' life have been interpreting as sweetness is actually a cultural practice, a Hawaiian code of emotional restraint. He is not naive, he is not incapable of anger. He has been containing it by design, following a tradition that no one in South Park understood because no one bothered to ask. This is significant because it reframes every moment of Butters' patience as a choice within a framework rather than an absence of emotion. He feels things fully, he always has. He has just been holding them in a container that was built for the purpose. And when the container starts to crack and going native, the show gets briefly serious about what is underneath it before pulling back into comedy. The container cracking is worth thinking about in the context of the broader theory. If Butters is the chosen one of Imagination Land, if his imagination is powerful enough to sustain a reality, and if the emotional material being held in that container is as significant as the show implies, then what happens when those two things interact? When the imagination and the suppressed anger and the accumulated grievances and the genuine power are all active at the same time? The show has not gone there. It has been cautious with Butters in a way it is not always cautious with other characters. It lets Cartman do genuinely terrible things and explores the consequences. It lets Randy spiral into behavior that has real effects on his family and his town. But Butters is kept at a certain temperature. He is allowed to suffer, allowed to cope, allowed to develop his Professor Chaos persona and his Hawaiian anger and his recurring therapy. He is not allowed to really let go. The charity of the most generous reading of this is that the show recognizes something fragile in Butters and does not want to break it. The less generous reading is that the show has been building something it does not quite have the courage to use. Either way, Butters is still there, still in South Park, still choosing kindness every morning, still carrying the aluminum foil helmet in the box in the garage, still the chosen one of a dimension that no longer needs him as far as anyone knows, but that he could return to at any moment. The imagination does not go away when you stop using it. It waits, it grows, it gets richer and stranger and more detailed the longer it goes without being exercised publicly. And Butters has been keeping his quiet for a very long time. There is one thing all 9 of these theories share that is worth naming before we move into the final pieces. Every single one of them is built on the premise that South Park means what it shows, that the details are intentional, that the callbacks are not accidents, that the writers have been building something that rewards attention over time. This is not guaranteed. Parker and Stone have said repeatedly that they write each episode in 6 days, that the show is reactive, immediate, made without the luxury of long-form planning. And that is true. But something strange happens when you make a show for almost 30 years with the same characters in the same setting. Even without planning it, patterns emerge. Decisions made in Season 3 create implications that Season 14 has to honor or ignore. Character voices develop consistency that the writers are obligated to maintain even when they have not consciously constructed it. The mythology builds itself one episode at a time through accumulated choices made under deadline pressure. This is how most durable creative work actually happens. Not through grand design, but through commitment to the thing, through continuing to show up to it, through the natural coherence that comes from a group of people who care about what they are making, spending enough time with it, that the work develops a logic they did not fully intend. The theories are our way of reading that logic back, of finding the shape that the show made without fully knowing it was making it. South Park did not plan to be mythological. It became mythological because it kept going. And now here we are in the quiet, sitting with what it built. Sleep on that. It is a long question. There is a small mountain town in Colorado. You know it by now. The snow is always falling. The boys are always 9. One of them keeps dying and nobody remembers. One of them knows how long they have really been standing at that bus stop and cannot make anyone believe him. One of them carries a conscience he tried to expel, and that keeps finding its way back regardless. One of them has been in that field, growing something, trying to matter, since before the word integrity meant anything to anyone. And one of them is patient and resilient and carrying something enormous that the world has not yet thought to ask him to use. We have spent a long time here tonight. 9 theories, 9 ways of looking at a show that has been on television for almost 30 years. Let's stay with it a little longer, because the theories are interesting, but what they are actually about is more interesting than any of them individually. What they are about is the question South Park has been asking since its first season, sometimes deliberately and sometimes almost accidentally, in the gaps between the shock humor and the celebrity satire and the topical commentary. The question is, what does it mean to be the kind of person you are, over and over, forever? Kenny dies. He comes back, he dies again, he never chose the curse, he never asked for the cult or the free beer or whatever the McCormicks got themselves tangled up with before he was born. He inherited it, and he carries it with complete awareness, every death stacked up in his memory, every resurrection bringing him back to a world that has already moved on. He does not become bitter in the way you might expect. He becomes tired. There is a difference. Bitterness is still hot. Tired is something else. Tired is the thing that makes you shoot yourself in the head at the end of a long day, not to make a point, but simply because you want the day to stop. But he still gets up, he still goes to school, he still stands at the bus stop in his orange parka, and when something needs doing, he does it. In the film, he sacrifices himself to save the world, and the sacrifice counts for something real. And he goes to heaven, he comes back, he always comes back. And he keeps showing up. Cartman has a conscience he has been fighting since childhood, and he is losing the fight more often than the show makes it obvious. The black fluid he vomited out in season 10 was not a permanent victory. It was a choice he made that day, in that room, and he has to keep making it. The conscience keeps returning because it is part of him. It cannot be fully expelled. And so there are the moments scattered through 28 seasons where the careful observer can see it getting through. A hug that is not a manipulation, a grief that is not performed, a warmth he covers with an insult immediately afterward, but that was real for the second it lasted. He will probably never acknowledge it. The persona is too important to him. The version of himself he has constructed requires maintaining cruelty as a constant, because the moment he lets it slip consistently, the whole structure becomes negotiable. And negotiable is something Cartman cannot afford to be. Not because he has no other options, but because he has spent so long building the fortress that he has forgotten the fortress was a choice. Kyle keeps giving the speech. He knows it will not stick. He gives it anyway. He has been doing this for 30 years of real time, standing on a mountain in Colorado, making the case for doing better, watching it get forgotten, making it again. There is a word for this kind of persistence, and it is not naive, and it is not stubborn. It is something closer to faith. Not in any institutional sense, but in the simple sense of believing something matters enough to keep saying it, knowing that the saying is the only thing you can control when the listening is not guaranteed. Butters is still waiting. He is still kind. He is still being manipulated by people he calls friends and punished by parents who love him in whatever cramped and insufficient way they are capable of. And somewhere underneath all of that, the imagination that once held an entire realm together is still there. The resilience that has survived everything is still there. Professor Chaos is still in the box in the garage. And Butters is choosing, every day, to be the person he wants to be rather than the person the world has given him every reason to become. Randy is in his field. He is almost certainly wrong about this being the thing that finally matters. He has been wrong about every other version of this feeling, and there is no particular reason to believe this one is different, but he is not done trying. He is not done believing that somewhere between who he is and who he imagined himself being, there is a version of himself worth arriving at. He will probably not find it. The show does not offer that kind of resolution, but the trying is not nothing. South Park has always been sold as a show about shock and profanity and celebrity mockery. And it is those things. It has never stopped being those things. But it is also, if you sit with it long enough, a show about what happens when you refuse to stop. When you keep coming back, keep making the argument, keep standing at the bus stop, keep growing the farm, keep trusting the people who keep letting you down. It is a show about the specific human quality of continuing, not heroically, not triumphantly, but persistently in the cold, in a small town where nothing ever really changes. The theories we talked about tonight do not diminish the comedy. The comedy is real. The years of shock humor and political satire and celebrity destruction are real, and they matter, and they are worth watching. But underneath all of it, there is a mythology that rewards patience. There is a show that has been saying something quiet and consistent for almost 30 years, using the same 4 boys and the same bus stop and the same mountain snow. It is saying, whatever you are, you keep being it. The curse does not lift, the conscience does not stay expelled, the speeches do not stick, the farm does not solve the problem, the alter ego does not change the world. And you get up in the morning and you go back and you try again because the alternative is not trying. And not trying is the one thing none of them are willing to do. That is South Park, if you look at it long enough. Not the jokes, not the controversies, just 4 boys in the snow and the lives happening around them and the fact that they keep showing up. The snow is falling on that quiet Colorado street. The bus is coming. Kenny is pulling his hood tight. He knows what is probably going to happen today. He has always known. He pulls the hood tight anyway, and he walks to the bus stop, and he stands there in the cold with the boys who will not remember him, and he waits. Sleep well. The mountain is quiet. The town is fine. Everything is, for now, fine. South Park is not a show that believes in easy answers. It is not a show that resolves things. The best episodes leave you with the argument still running in your head, the question still open, the feeling that the satire was pointing at something real that is still sitting there waiting to be dealt with. That is the show at its best. Not comfortable, not reassuring, not willing to pretend the problem is smaller than it is. But there is a warmth in it too that gets underestimated. The same show that fed a boy his own parents in a chili has episodes of genuine tenderness. The same show that destroyed Scientology in primetime has episodes where Stan and Kyle are simply friends, sitting together, being the version of themselves that is not performing anything for anyone. The mountain is real. The town is cold and small and perpetually under assault from forces both satirical and supernatural. And the boys keep finding each other there. 9-year-olds who have been 9 years old for almost 30 years, who have saved the world 3 or 4 times, depending on how you count, and then come home and done their homework, who have died and grieved and forgotten and been forgotten and kept showing up anyway. The myths of this place are strange and sometimes sad and occasionally horrifying, but the fact of 4 boys at a bus stop in the morning waiting together is something else. Something the show returns to because it needs to, because underneath everything it was always about this. The ordinary persistence of people who care about each other even when the world is unreasonable, even when time is broken, even when nothing stays fixed. You can love a show for its comedy, you can love it for its satire, you can love it for the shock of it, the audacity of it, the specific pleasure of watching something go further than you thought it was allowed to go. But the people who have stayed with South Park for the full run of it, from 1997 to now, have mostly stayed because of something they cannot always name. Something about these characters, these boys and their families and this town that keeps pulling them back. The theories are a way of honoring that pull, a way of sitting with the show seriously, of taking its internal logic as something worth examining, of treating its contradictions not as failures but as invitations to think harder. All the theories we talked about tonight are ways of saying, this matters, this is worth the attention. This show built something in us and we want to understand what it is. What it is, at the bottom of everything, is a mountain, a small, cold mountain town where time is broken and one boy cannot die, and another knows how long they have really been standing there, and a fat kid keeps losing a battle with his own conscience. And an innocent boy carries something enormous he has not been asked to use, and a middle-aged man keeps starting over in his field. A town where things keep happening and resetting and happening again, and where the fact that they reset does not make the happening less real. The snow is falling on South Park, Colorado. The bus will come, the boys will get on it. They have been doing this for almost 30 years. They will be doing it again tomorrow. Sleep well. There is nothing else you need to know tonight. The mountain is quiet. The theories are all here, waiting for the next time you want to come back to them. And in the morning, or sometime this week, when you put on an episode and see those 4 boys at the bus stop in the snow, you will know something about them that you did not know before. And maybe that is what all of this was for. There is a version of watching South Park that does not require any of this. You can turn it on and laugh at the jokes and let the episodes wash over you and go to bed without any of what we talked about tonight. That version is real and it is valid, and that is what most viewers do. The show was built for that version. It works beautifully at that level. But the show also works at this other level, the one we have been occupying for the past several hours, the level where you sit with the patterns and the mythology and the small details that accumulate into something larger than any single episode. The level where Kenny's parka is not just a costume, and Kyle's speeches are not just a running gag, and Butter's sweetness is not just a character type. The level where South Park becomes a place with rules and history and a genuine internal logic that rewards the people who stay with it long enough to find it. Both versions are the show. Neither one cancels the other out. That is what makes it worth your time after 28 seasons, and what will make it worth your time for whatever comes next. It is still building something. It is still going. The mountain is still there. The snow is still falling. And whatever Trey Parker and Matt Stone are writing tonight in their 6-day window before the next episode airs, it will land in a world that has 28 seasons of accumulated mythology waiting to receive it. That is not nothing. For a show that started as construction paper cutouts in a college apartment, that is everything. Good night. Sleep well. The theories will be here when you wake up. South Park, Colorado. Population, still 9 years old. Still standing in the snow, still impossible to look away from.